All right, we're going to get a little bit wonky here because we're going to be talking about your tax dollars and how those are being spent by the state of Illinois. And it's not just the state's general revenue fund we'll talk about. We'll also talk about all the federal dollars and special fund spending of tax resources that the state of Illinois is expected to spend in the fiscal year that started July 1st. Welcome back, Springfield's Morning News. I'm Greg Bishop on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk. The Commission on Government Forecasting and Accountability. It's a bipartisan commission, equal parts Democrats, equal parts Republicans from the House and the Senate. And they released yesterday a state of Illinois budget summary for fiscal year 2024. Now, this is 177 pages long, and you can pour through it and look at all the resources, and it gives you a bit of an overview of how the budget passed and their authority to review these things, and it even breaks down line by line how much each state agency is getting, how much the state of Illinois is expected to bring in state tax resources. But one thing that's fascinating, at least that stuck out to me here on page 25, it shows overall spending, total appropriation. And I think this highlights something not many Illinois taxpayers realize. It's not just the state general revenue fund that gets spent. We hear a lot of times whenever talking about the budget that, hey, the state's budget, 5 years ago is like $36 billion or $39 billion. And then the next year is $42 billion. And then it just keeps growing and growing and growing. Where the most recent budget that started July 1st, we hear and see the headlines, it's a $50.4 billion spending plan. That's not necessarily true because that's just state tax dollars, right? So the state income tax, some sales tax dollars, and a whole host of other things, right? Gas taxes and so on, and special funds. But when you look at the total number of spend of tax resources from state and federal taxes, you go from 50.6 bill or 50.4 billion to a large 190 plus billion dollars. And this is something that, again, you can see in the COGFA report here. So to talk more about this, I've got Truth in Accounting's Sheila Weinberg with me to really lay out what's going on here. Sheila, this is obviously something people don't necessarily hear about when the headlines constantly talk about only a $50.4 billion budget. But as we see, the total spend is more than $190 billion. And what's fascinating is that's almost $95 billion more than it was 6 years ago for total spend. What's going on here? Good morning. Thanks for taking time with us.
Oh, good morning. Thanks, Greg. Sorry to talk about all these numbers with people. And it is just like you're chasing your tail, As you mentioned, they only talk about a $50.4 billion budget. But as this report shows, the total appropriations is $193 billion. So this quote budget that they're talking about that they quote balance is, only 26% of the overall appropriations that the legislature did for budgeted year fiscal 2024.
So looking again at this chart from COGFA, total appropriations history, fiscal year 2018, total appropriations is $99.1 billion. Then you fast forward all the way to fiscal year 2024, and it's $193.5 billion. So where does all of this money come from if all we hear time and again is these headlines that, there's only $50.4 billion being spent here? Where's all this other money coming from? What is that? 80 plus billion dollar? How much more is that? From 50.4 to 193.5? That's a lot of money.
Yeah. Looking at, they do have on page, they do note the funding sources. Most of it is special funds. More than 36% of it is special funds, not including the highway special fund, which is $19 billion. And as you mentioned, the general fund is only, less than $50 billion. The special funds is, what are special funds? How are they defined? It's whatever the legislature decides are special funds. We did a study a few years ago with the Union League Club and found that there were more than 600 special funds And so to give people, bring it back to people's personal lives, we looked at the special funds and, found some crazy wildlife ones. But the most relatable one, I think, is a 911 enhancement fund. Hopefully people are looking closely at their cellular phone bill. And on their cellular phone bill, they will find a tax or a fee for a 911 enhancement. And to you and me, that would mean that the money should go to enhancing the 911 services. So that's just an example of, but they can sweep that and use it for whatever they want to. But that's what it's supposed to be. They're so loosey-goosey with these special funds that remember there a few years ago, we had a constitutional amendment that safe roads that required the legislature to use the highway money for highways. They're so loosey-goosey about how they use this money for other things, and how this money is all over the place, and that we had to pass a constitutional amendment that required the legislature and government to only use the highway fund for highway funds. But there's, again, more than 600 other funds that they use, and that's included in this appropriation list.
We're talking with Sheila Weinberg, Truth in Accounting, about the latest COGFA report that is about a month after the start of the fiscal year, July 1st, and of course it goes over the budget process and how lawmakers passed an appropriations bill and then the budget implementation bill. But we hear constantly the headline of $50.4 billion spending plan. It's the largest state spending plan, but when you really look at all of the tax dollars that are planned to be spent, it's not $50.4 billion, it's $193.5 billion, which is like $95 billion more than it was 8 or 6 years ago from 2018. Sheila, what's driving that? Is that inflation? Are we just getting more federal dollars? Are we just tapping into more of these special funds that you lay out? What is making Illinois spend from $99 billion in 2018 to $195 billion for fiscal year 2024?
Well, being the CPA I am and being boring, I took and looked at the annual increases. And in between 2018-19, it wasn't that bad. There was a 7% increase. Some would say that is bad, but then COVID happened, and then the floodgates just opened. The federal government threw money at everything. The states threw money at everything. So between 2019 and 2020, the annual appropriations increased by a whopping 35%. Then in 2021, it was 19%. And 2022, it went down to 8%, and now it's about 3 to 2%. But keep in mind, okay, COVID happened. We had to spend lots of extra money to deal with COVID, was the theory. But then, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but aren't we pretty much done with COVID?
Well, yeah, it's all the federal funds that came in during that time to local school districts, universities, local governments, PPP loans, the unemployment system, and so on. All of those dollars, but after COVID and the public health declaration and the disaster declaration is done. Shouldn't we see the level of federal spending go down? It seems like it's continuing to go up.
Yeah, it's like it. Well, and also you would think that, COVID happened. We had to put a lot of money in it. Now we don't have to do that anymore. So we should go back to the spending what we were spending before. Let's just even go to, I used the 7%. Let's just increase it by 7% a year. We should be at about $150 billion. Instead, we're at $190 billion. Wouldn't you think, you had to spend a lot of money for an emergency. Now we don't have that emergency anymore. So we should go back to the spending level we had before. But instead, we're continuing, not going back. We're just taking those increases and we're adding even more increases to that.
We're talking with Sheila Weinberg, Truth in Accounting, and I don't know if you can get any more true in showing the accounting here of the state's resource and the spending increasing substantially from 2018. Why is it important taxpayers know how these dollars are spent, not just from state resources, but even from federal resources?
Well, it's all about accountability. And, even this report, again, I'm an accountant. I look at these numbers all the time. Even this report is confusing because I went ahead and, again, being the boring CPA I am, I compared the spending for the latest financial report that's available, which is 2021, and these appropriations and this report versus what the state's expenses for that year. There's $30 billion extra of appropriations. So, I don't, it could be that there's, I don't know. I don't know why are we appropriating more money? And again, I'm a sophisticated user and I don't know. It's very hard to, if you have special funds and federal money and local money and everything's commingled, but then it's not commingled. And as you mentioned, there's the general fund that's supposed to be balanced, but then we can transfer money in and we can record loan proceeds as revenue. And it makes it impossible. The reason it's important is it makes it impossible for the citizens and even the legislators to hold the state accountable for their spending.
Sheila Weinberg, Truth in Accounting. Finally here, there's continued conversation about pensions at the State House. New report out from other groups showing that Illinois has the worst pension funding in the country, including when you wrap in Chicago pensions. Talk a bit about what should be happening here. Of course, Truth in Accounting, you guys look at these numbers. How bad is it in the state of Illinois, and how does it impact all of the spending we're seeing from this budget?
Well, a part of that spending is, the pension contributions. And, if you can look at your personal budget, Greg, and couldn't we at least agree to that you should be paying the minimum on your credit cards? I hope you don't have credit card debt, but shouldn't you be paying the minimum on that, Greg? I ask. Well,
my wife recommends, and we've been living by it, paying off that credit card bill entirely each and every month. That's at least our go-to plan at home.
Right. And at a minimum, I think everybody could agree that we should pay the minimum payments on your credit card. Well, if you look at the pension system as a credit card, that they've charged the future taxpayers' credit card for this amount, they're not. The first step is let's pay the minimum on that. What do the state's actuaries say you should be paying into that versus what the state is paying? And it's $5 billion different. No wonder it's continuing to increase. Think about if you didn't pay your minimum on your credit card, how much you would wind up with additional interest and penalty. And then the other thing I think everybody should agree on is the governor touted during his campaign that he had balanced the budget for the 4 years. Well, 2 of those years, he borrowed billions of dollars from the Federal Reserve. Let's at least agree that you shouldn't record loan proceeds as revenue. When you get a loan, if you went to another bank to get another loan, if you included this first loan's proceeds as income, they would kick you out of the bank. But that's what the governor does when he says he's balanced the budget.
Sheila Weinberg, Truth in Accounting. I've got a question here from a listener, State Representative Stephen Reich. He asks, what about the start of talks bringing our pension plans into Tier 2 compliance? How do we do that? Tier 2 safe harbor has to be fixed soon, he says. Can you address that at all when it comes to Truth in Accounting?
Yeah, what they did is they came up with a scheme, just like the pension scheme is a whole scheme, to offer Tier 2, and I don't know if they know this when it passed that it didn't meet muster with the IRS, or did they unknown it? It would be bad if they knew it, but it'd be bad if they didn't know it. That they were passing this scheme that the IRS wouldn't accept. So now, of course, we have to fix this. Well, anytime you talk about a fix in a pension plan, you're talking about additional benefits, which obviously will increase the benefits to the employees. So will increase our unfunded liability. And hey, we're already the worst state of how much money we have unfunded pension liability. I guess we'll even be the worst of the worst.
Sheila Weinberg, greatly appreciate your time. We'll definitely be talking about these numbers again in the near future. So get that accounting prowess sharp and keep it sharp, and we'll try to make some sense of these tax dollars in the near future. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you, Greg.
It is Springfield's Morning News on 92.7 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk, and we got to take a break. Stay tuned.